Mine says 6:59.
Yeah, about 45 seconds. Still working on there?
Yes.
All right. Okay.
Good morning. I'm Sherman Stanford, and this is Making Sense of the Chaos. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to understand the world in which we live. We're trying to make things fit together without contradiction or arbitrariness. Those are the tests of coherence within our view of reality. In order to make sense of the chaos, there are a few principles that we need to understand as our framework. First, and we do these every day, but I really want to emphasize these principles. That's why we go over them every single day. First, God created the cosmos for His glory, not for man's. He's the point of everything, and His glory is the point of everything. Not man's glory, not man's best interest, not man's anything. Second, the jewel of creation is man. Now, as the jewel, of course, man becomes the most important aspect of the creation, but he's still a created being and always subsidiary to the Creator, the supreme being, God. Three, although in no sense the author of evil, God ordained Adam's fall. And there's a great mystery. Four, in Adam, the entire creation fell, including all of mankind. Five, as a result of the fall, God pronounced the curse of enmity between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman. The seed of the woman is Jesus Christ and all those in him, and the seed of the serpent is Satan, the demons, and the remainder of humanity. This is known as the great antithesis. It's also called by theologians the proto-evangelion, which means it's the first intimation of the good news coming. That is the Jesus Christ as the Savior of the world, saving us from sin. It doesn't tell us exactly how that's going to happen, but it points forward to that. Sixth, all subsequent human experience, social experience, that is, interactions between human beings, is an outworking of this enmity. And seventh, the unregenerate are without excuse. They know God, but they suppress that truth, that knowledge, in culpable self-deceit. Now, we have discussed God and His attributes. We've discussed man, both unfallen man before the fall, and we've talked about the fall, its effects, and its extent. And we've talked about fallen man, the seed of the serpent. Now we're talking about the seed of the woman, redeemed man, and Jesus Christ. Yesterday, we talked about the Trinity, and we'll pick up from that point. Interestingly, the concept of the Trinity has solved an age-old conundrum philosophers have pondered and struggled with, the question of the one and the many. Is reality, they wonder, ultimately one, or is it ultimately many? Some belief systems, Hinduism and other pantheistic systems, for instance, treat reality as ultimately one. Essentially, they believe that manyness or particularity, the fact that you and I are separate beings, is an illusion giving way to the ultimate reality of oneness. Other belief systems aver that manyness is the ultimate reality, that oneness is essentially an illusion. Well, at this point, you may be wondering, why do we even worry about what philosophers in ivory towers are thinking about? Well, it's because ideas have consequences. And since God has made them more inclined to think and to integrate ideas about reality to where they make sense, or at least they try to make sense of them, and since they do that particularly well, those ideas in one form or another seep down into culture and they influence what we think and what we do. For example, when I was in college back in the 70s, there was a beer company, Schlitz, that ran a series of ads, and the essential message was, you only go around once in life, so grab for all the gusto. And obviously, Schlitz was supposed to be the embodiment of all the gusto. Well, what most people didn't realize is that this was a popular expression of a philosophy called existentialism, which was first, well, it came out of a lot of other ideas, but essentially existentialism was a creation of Jean-Paul Sartre, the French philosopher. That's got a lot of serious problems, but nevertheless, the point I want you to understand is that because this philosopher in Paris, France, came up with ideas, an idea, that idea permeated society to the extent that it was accepted broadly, and it controlled a lot of our actions. So we need to understand that if we don't know about the ideas out there, that doesn't mean they don't influence us. It just means that we're unaware of the influence. So becoming aware of the ideas that affect the decisions that we make is a pretty important thing. Because ideas have consequences, and bad ideas have bad consequences. The problem of the one and the many has had its share of difficulties. Belief in the ultimate reality of either unity, oneness, or particularity, manyness, necessarily distorts one's view of reality, because either view consigns its opposite to the realm of illusion in defiance of human common sense realism. The belief in either the ultimacy of unity or the ultimacy of particularity fails to faithfully reflect the actual world in which we live, and therefore neither belief can satisfy those hungry for truth. Inevitably, those who see oneness as ultimate reality minimize and dismiss the importance of the many individual people and things existing in the world. Those who see manyness as ultimate reality, struggle with the concept of unity. But we are surrounded by both unity and particularity at every moment of our existence. Denying that ultimate reality is both equally one and equally many inevitably becomes too obvious an untruth to long sustain. We must have some way of reconciling these apparent philosophical contradictions, or we face incoherency and its crippling effects in our effort to understand reality. And that's been the problem philosophers have had. Aha, here comes Jesus Christ to the rescue. Christianity, which includes a God who is both one and many, three, is the only belief system that solves the problem of the one and the many. God is one, so oneness is ultimate reality. God is three, so manyness is equally ultimate reality. However, the Bible, the clearest source of ultimate truth for Christians, makes no effort to explain the mystery. It merely asserts it as true. Some may argue that the Trinity is an example of arbitrariness in the Bible. And of course it is, in the sense that the Bible never seeks authority apart from God for authentication. But since God is the ultimate authority, since he is creator of everything that is, then there is no way in which we can accuse him of arbitrariness in the same sense that human beings are arbitrary. When human beings are arbitrary, they do not have a sufficient reason for the assertions they make. When God makes an assertion that's mysterious and he doesn't explain the assertion to us, we know that it's not arbitrary because he is a God of reason, and everything that he does has a good and sufficient reason. For that reason, getting back to reason again, God cannot be accused of being arbitrary in the way human beings are. That's an important distinction for us to bear in mind. Because he is the sole source of all truth, and because he never lies, he is also never arbitrary as humans are. And while no effort to explain the Trinity is made, it is easily shown that it is the missing piece of the puzzle over unity or particularity as ultimate reality. Conforming as it does to the actual world and avoiding contradiction, it is not only not arbitrary, it is true, and it explains elements of reality that are otherwise inexplicable. Assertions from God in his word must be true or they cannot come from God. Because they are invariably true, they invariably correspond to the reality within which we live, without contradiction. Therefore, ultimately, even seemingly arbitrary statements by God are not arbitrary. They always accurately reflect reality and have a sufficient and good explanation. Man, on the other hand, is a finite creature. He has neither the authority nor the capacity to create truth. He claims to, but he does not. That's part of his arrogance, part of his autonomy, his claim to rule himself, to set a law by himself that the cosmos is subject to. It's nonsense. He can do no such thing. We live in a world where God is sovereign, and his law and his law alone are sovereign. And when man seeks to assert himself as autonomous, meaning self-law, that he gives the law out of himself, that he creates law out of himself, he is then a rebel, a cosmic rebel against God. Therefore, because he cannot create truth, he is required to justify the truth of beliefs he holds either by showing their self-evidence or by establishing formal proofs of their truth, if he wishes to convince others of the truths of those beliefs. If he fails to do so, his assertions lack the weight of authority to compel belief. And he'll never convince that little 4-year-old child who keeps asking why, the child that continues to live in us. That child is the same one who, when confronted with the emperor who was naked, although everyone was extolling his beautiful new clothes, said, "But the emperor is naked." Denying God's truth, the only truth that exists, his assertions, inasmuch as they violate truth either directly revealed by God or following by good and necessary inference from God's direct revelation, are arbitrary and inevitably degenerate into contradiction and meaninglessness. The essence of arbitrariness, then, is lack of provable truth of factual assertions. Since all of God's assertions are at least provable by the impossibility of the contrary, then none of God's assertions are arbitrary. Another ancillary proof of the Trinity is that it provides a meaningful context for the assertion that God is love. I mean, how often have you heard that? God is love. God is love. Now, of course, you have to define your terms. What do you mean by love? But nevertheless, let's assume that God is love. Well, how can he be a God of love if he has no one to love? Does that make sense? Well, if he has to create man in order to demonstrate his love, for him to be a God of love, then he is not self-sufficient. He is not perfect. If he is not perfect, then he's not God. So he has to be self-sufficient within himself to be God. Therefore, there has to be more than one person within the Godhead for God to love and be a God of love. He has to love other persons. Well, if there are three persons within the Godhead, his loving, each of the persons loving the other two persons, satisfies the necessity imposed by his being a God of love. Okay, now how does God reveal himself? Well, first of all, he reveals himself in a general sense in the cosmos for all to see. In Paul's letter to the church in Rome, he wrote, quote, "For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made. So they are without excuse." That's verse 20 of chapter 1. Okay, so we can look around and we can see clearly enough of God's invisible attributes, his eternal power and his divine nature, to be certain that he exists. If you don't believe that, then you don't believe God. And if you don't believe God, claiming to have faith in him means nothing. Claiming to have belief in him means nothing. If I say that I have great belief in you, but I don't believe what you say, I'm talking nonsense. No. If we have faith in God, it means we believe in him. If we believe in him, we certainly believe him. If he doesn't have a word somewhere, objective word that does not change, that we can look at, that's his word to us, then we cannot know anything more than what we generally know about God. Now, that's all right for knowing that God exists, but how are we going to know about our proper relationship with him? How are we going to know how to be saved? Well, the answer is we won't. Now, if God, in fact, is a God of love, and if he is a reasonable God, the God of reason, which he has to be, and if he's our creator, then it follows logically that he would have given us his word. And we do have that word. Now, Paul also said that we live and move and have our being in God. That's in Acts 17 at verse 28. Every thought man thinks, every word he speaks, all acts of his, even acts of deliberate rebellion against God, point to the Creator. Moreover, every aspect of the creation, showing design and order, sings God's praise. Now, how do acts of rebellion against God point to his existence as Creator? Well, think about it. It's absurd to contemplate a rational being rebelling against a non-being. If the rebel truly believed God did not exist, his rational attitude toward the idea of God would be contempt, indifference, or at most mild annoyance, not rebellion. To illustrate, does anyone react angrily and rebelliously toward Santa Claus, or the Easter Bunny, or the Tooth Fairy? Yet clearly, there are countless adults who angrily assert their disbelief in the literal existence of God. Unless we grant that, despite their angry denials and self-deceit, they know he exists and yet refuse to acknowledge him, this is inexplicable. Thus, their very rebellion tacitly acknowledges his existence. Do you understand? If I'm going to rebel against something, the something I'm rebelling against must at least exist in my mind. How can I rebel against something that's nothing? I'm then rebelling against nothing. That's the epitome of futility, and no one intentionally does anything in futility. As a personal aside, the seminal moment in my journey toward God occurred when I realized that far from disbelieving in God's existence, I was bitterly angry with him. Yes, that did happen. I had that moment of realization. It shocked me. I mean, my eyes must have gotten this big when I realized that I was angry at God. Before that, I would angrily denounce him, but I didn't realize I was angry at him. I was angry about the idea of God, I thought, but I didn't realize I was angry at him. It says ending live video.
Oh, what?
Yes.
I don't know why it's doing that. Oh, shucks. That's not good. I can't. Well, let's see. It's bizarre. Just continue on the YouTube.
On the other one?
Yeah. Shucks. Just continue on YouTube.
Anyway, the absurdity of a creature, me, rebelling against his creator, punctured my rebellion like a nail in a tire. Interestingly, for the next couple of weeks, although I was afraid to admit my faith and submit to his authority, when counseling clients, I would hear someone inside me speaking aloud through my voice, preaching the gospel to them. While it astonished me each time it occurred, it is impossible to describe the shock I felt the first time. It was surreal. Listening to myself speak the gospel, even though I was not ready to openly submit to God, part of me knew with certainty that I was speaking the truth while the rest of me was simply incredulous. It was like two people were living in my head. And one was preaching to my clients, and the other one was watching in wide open-mouthed astonishment that this other fellow who's supposed to be Sherman as well was doing this. I never have quite gotten over that moment, by the way, or those moments. Furthermore, even to express rebellion against the Creator, who is the source of all truth and knowledge, and who is the final reference point of predication in the world, requires the unbeliever to metaphorically stand in God's lap to slap his face. Without the necessary preconditions for knowledge sourced in God alone, there could be no communication, not even to express rebellion. You understand? To say there is no God presupposes there's no truth, there's no meaning, there's no purpose. Now, when you say there is no God, you mean it, you purposely intend to say it, and you want the one on the other side to believe that you think it's true. Now, those three things could not exist without the God you're denying. So in denying God, you tacitly confess his existence. Does that make sense? Now, God also reveals himself in a special, express way by his written word. His special revelation, the Bible, is progressive. Now, we've talked about that. God, and as a loving God, and as creator, of course, would have given us his word. And that's the Bible. Now, we're going to get into why it's clearly the Bible in a few moments, but right now, that's the point we're making. The New Testament revelation is foreshadowed in the Old Testament. The Old Testament is like a room that's dimly lit. Many objects are in the room. Some are unseen altogether. Some are visible, but only in vague, shadowy outline. Turn on a light, and suddenly, much more can be seen. Although there is nothing new in the room, just much more light, objects not previously known to exist can be clearly seen. In the same way, we see the details of God's plan much more clearly in the New Testament, despite the pieces of the plan being in place during the time of writing the Old Testament. Right, now we're going to talk about the reliability and authority of the Bible. This is important, very important, because God's special revelation of himself is contained in the writings of Scripture. Let us briefly consider the nature and reliability of the Bible. The initial question to consider is the claim of the Bible itself regarding its inspiration. Does it present itself simply as a collection of 66 books written by 40 uninspired men over 1,500 years in genres ranging from poetry to historical narrative to wisdom writings to sweeping, thunderous, eschatological flights of astonishing metaphor? Or is it simply the musings of men whose subjects include seemingly far-fetched claims of a God-man who died either as an example of selfless love or even more fancifully, to satisfy the vengeful claims of a brooding, angry God? No, the writers of the Bible self-consciously present their writings as God himself speaking through them, unfolding a cosmic plan of unimaginable brilliance. The writers present him unfolding his creation from nothingness into truth, goodness, and beauty externalized from the Creator into his creation, with an eye to eternal fellowship with the creatures who comprise the crown of his glory, mankind. The portrait they paint reveals the template for the first Greek tragedy of evil entering paradise, precipitating a shattering of goodness, truth, and beauty into plunging despair. Then the redemption of the creation by the death and resurrection of the hero, followed by a long, painstaking restoration of the original glory of the creation amid the forces of good and evil, dividing mankind into opposing, warring camps until the end of time. They also tell the story of the Creator acting through a tiny portion of humanity, Israel, to restore not only the original vision of paradise, but to spread the restored paradise to the four corners of the earth through the courage, goodness, and humble sacrifice of the hero, Jesus the Christ, the heir to the throne, who gives his life to save the fair damsel, his bride-to-be, and who himself is restored to life by the creative power of his Father, the King, overcoming evil and death. The unfolding story then completes the picture of the consummation of the marriage between the hero and the fair damsel, the church, which is flesh of his flesh and bone of his bone, to the extent that she is also referred to as his body. Throughout time and eternity, where they live happily ever after, despite their struggles to progressively complete the victory over evil and death prior to eternity. For a full treatment of the reliability of the writings, which came to be called the book, that's the meaning of the word Bible, many works are available. Josh McDowell's 2 books, Evidence That Demands a Verdict and A Ready Defense, are excellent sources. We will only touch briefly on the issues because the proofs are both too numerous and too detailed to fully consider here, but we'll talk about those. But if you want more, you can look up those other sources. The Bible unquestionably makes both explicit and implicit claims of divine inspiration. The 40 writers were different men with different personalities, writing from different perspectives, sometimes on similar subjects, sometimes varying widely. Each had his own writing style, each used his own words. But each was aware that he was writing beyond himself, each making authoritative truth claims, generally specifically in the name of God, that only the authority of deity could justify. In reading them, their consciousness of speaking with God's authority rings as clearly as a bell to those who have been given ears to hear, the regenerate. They made numerous prophecies about future events that subsequently occurred. None of the prophecies can be shown to have failed. The improbability of having so many prophecies come true by chance is off the charts. It's just, it's impossible. There were hundreds of prophecies. Imagine just flipping a coin hundreds of times and correctly guessing the heads or tails each time. I mean, any gambler knows that even to get to 10 is impossible. The odds get so high. Well, it wasn't just a this or that in each of those prophecies. There were many, many things that could have occurred. But of all the many things that could occur, only the things specifically prophesied did occur. The odds of that just stagger the imagination. No doubt there are those who question the assertion that the regenerate recognize the ring of truth in scriptural writings while the unregenerate do not. That seems to be self-serving argumentation, special pleading. The answer is that, of course it is. It is special pleading in precisely the same way that the unregenerate man's unwillingness to accept the truth claims of God is special pleading. The spectacles, the worldview through which we see everything, they shape the form of reality we see for both redeemed and rebels. The regenerate man's glasses show him that reality includes the Creator as its fundamental principle. In contrast, the unregenerate man's glasses reveal no God as his fundamental principle. Among other things, this book is intended to show that the regenerate believer's view of reality is internally coherent, non-arbitrary, and conforms perfectly to the world as it is, while the God denier's view of reality is none of these. Well, Bill, I think we're at a half an hour.
Yep.
So we'll close at this point. We'll take up this subject tomorrow. We have more to say on this. And I hope you have a great day today. We'll see you tomorrow. God bless you.